Thanks, David, Tim, and Linda. Linda, we're going to go ahead and take you off so you can attend as a listener, which we really appreciate. Just give me 1 second to do that. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the University Student Senators. They are a self-governing body composed of student representatives that unifies the voice of new school students. They have been collecting questions on behalf of all students, and they're going to be asking those now. I'll also post a statement and some more information from them over in the chat box. So today's representatives are Anna. She's a Lang student studying psychology and a co-chair of the USS. Claire, we only have Claire, is a student at Lang and NSPE doing a bachelor's and master's in global studies and international affairs. She's also a co-chair. And then Chen, if you want to wave, is a student at NSSR studying philosophy. She's the director of the USS Finance Committee. So if all three of you want to take yourselves off mute, I'll let you all take it away and I will move Linda.
Hi, everybody. Hi, all of our attendees. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. So I guess the first question that we have is for Tim and David. Well, all of our questions are for Tim and David, but the first one that we have is how has the university worked with professors to evaluate all classes in order to determine whether or not course objectives can be met through online learning? Has the university considered refunding classes on a class-by-class basis for courses that are deemed not conducive to online learning?
Go ahead, Tim. Do you want to take that? Yeah. Thank you. That's a great question. So as I said before, we put a huge amount of effort into training all of our faculty, people in the opera programs and the fashion programs and dance programs, moving their teaching to virtual. Now, of course, that's not the same thing, but we are putting a tremendous effort into making sure that's the highest possible standard that we can deliver. And we are very confident about the standards that are being delivered there. That said, people do need access to facilities, which is also why we want to extend, as David outlined, access to facilities beyond this year, beyond this semester, and so on, so that we can also make good on that. Virtual learning is a different form. It has its virtues and it has its downsides, just like on campus does, in respect to that. But we have, as we outlined, put in a huge effort in, and the faculty in particular put a huge effort into actually not just going virtual, but actually really trying to deliver a quality education at this point in the proceedings. And given that these circumstances are happening to all of us simultaneously across the world, this is what we're doing and what we have to do. And so we will be assessing, we'll be asking the students. We have changed the student evaluation forms, not to be evaluating the faculty so much, but to help us understand the strengths and weaknesses of the educational experience. But as David outlined, we're putting a tremendous amount into the education in this format. So that's where we are.
Okay, thank you. So our next question is no members of the University Student Senate were a part of the decision-making process in regards to tuition refunds. Were there any student representatives at the decision-making table, and why would the university be willing to commit to student representative involvement when these types of emergency decisions are made in the future?
Oops, where am I? Here we are. Okay. Thank you, Claire, for that question. No, the short answer is no. There was not students at decision table, in part because there was no decision being made. Refunding tuition, it was just something, as I tried to explain earlier, it's not financially feasible in keeping the university intact. I do think it's a very fair point that as we go along, and we've actually have done that in prior emergencies, bring particularly student senate co-chairs and representatives in to run things by them. But again, this is a very fast-moving situation, and one of our, we had to make decisions pretty quickly as we went forward. So I certainly hope in the future that we can call on students to help with those decisions.
Well, President Van Zandt, if I may, the decision for tuition was made quite late. You know, it was made relatively late. So we were just wondering if during that time, like the conversations that went on, if we could have a commitment in the future that Student Senate or other student leadership groups can be in on that conversation and the eventual decision.
Well, I can't commit for my successor, but my guess would be that he's pretty open to that. I've always been open to that and tried when we could to bring people in. Sometimes it's not possible. Other times, frankly, we get going and we haven't done it yet. So it's not a matter of ignoring that. It's more a matter of getting it done. And I think a commitment to something like that would be very important going forward.
Thanks.
And I think it's worth saying, I think as David's transitioning out of the presidency, to say that over his tenure, David has put a huge amount of emphasis on strengthening the Student Senate over those 10 years. It's the student presence in governance and what have you, and I'm sure Dwight McBride will be continuing that tradition, that momentum.
Great. So this is kind of a follow-up from Anna's question, and this is for Tim. So you in your speech had already mentioned that performance and making-based classes are being hugely impacted by this. And, I guess it's two parts. So if those, if in-person instruction and facilities are vital for those class, to deliver the level of education that they have to, in access to them will be, basically students are not getting education of the caliber they're expecting from the new school. So what's the first part is, what's the justification of keeping the tuition for these classes? And the second, what's the specific measures that the university is taking to make sure that even though these classes cannot be performed at their usual level, they are, improving, or they are, performed as well as possible given the circumstances?
Yes, thank you. So really what I was trying to stress is they're very different. It's a very different format. There's, technology is changing very rapidly, and in the performing arts, people are performing synchronously online, increasingly in composing and so on. I know the software that's been purchased recently to enable performance students to be able to engage with that technology and continue to work together virtually, which, while I don't want to diminish some of the sacrifices, is also very relevant to the future of performance, because more and more performance will happen in that format once students graduate. So it's a good education unto itself, as well as being quite a powerful tool. On the making side of things, the more material-based programs, and maybe I should say at this point that a lot of people on this call won't know my background, but prior to being in this position, I was the academic dean and then the dean of Parsons, and so I'm an art school graduate, a photographer, and so I understand the studio practices very well and the necessity to have access to equipment and facilities. But I do think now the technology is increasingly powerful, and the faculty are bringing a real pedagogical expertise to adjusting to this kind of format, and so there's that side of things, and on the other side, we will continue and will respond to this and other forums with students to think of other ways that we can actually enhance access for students once we're back on campus to other kinds of courses that we may be able to give you going forward, free of charge, for credit, not for credit, and so on, just to make sure that we do enhance your education in every way we possibly can. But I also do have a lot of confidence in the faculty and the way that they're adjusting to this and really be able to provide what is a different, but still a very excellent education.
Okay. Anything more from our student senators?
How much time do we have left?
We're tracking really well with time. We should have a good 20 minutes for open questions.
If you have another question, go ahead. Sure.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, just the change in grading policy was also something that we put in place. Acknowledge what was going on, not just with the change in learning, but the whole situation, the whole life impact of what's going on, and recognizing that really this is now in a moment where we are working with the students to give you the best education possible, and grading is something we wanted to almost put to the side and have everyone just focus on the best learning you could possibly have.
So one of the other questions that we had was the status of the emergency fund. How has it been allocated? How many students have applied, and how much has been given out?
Good question. I touched on that a little earlier, and it's a very flexible, changing operation. We've always had a small emergency fund. Some of you may be familiar with the Petrie Fund, but we've radically expanded that, and we've had even before the virus, or from February 1st, we've had about 240 students apply. Over time, some drop out. Some say we've processed about 100 applications, and we've granted probably every request or worked with the student on every request since the virus crisis came into place. A lot of the applications have been for emergency help with rent or living expenses. Another category have been for food shortage, medical sort of health related expenses that people have incurred. Students from all 5 schools have been assisted through this program, and what we're trying to do is administer it in a way that's fair to all students. So it shouldn't depend on what school you're in or what program you're in. We're trying to evaluate your situation. There's no rubric or bright line rule that says, well, if I have X, I get Y. It really is the judgment of our experts in student success working with the students and trying to understand their situation. Again, the basic principles that we're following is to say that we're going to devote the money that we can to help those who are most on the edge. Doesn't mean, frankly, that it doesn't mean that we can even help them completely. And certainly there are many people who are outside of that group who also are hurting in one way or the other. So we fully understand. But as I said, there's been a rapid expansion of that program, and we will continue to look at that as time goes on. So.
Thank you, David and Tim. Senators Anna, Claire, and Chen, thank you so much for this. I'm going to go ahead and move you back to attendee status as you requested. It'll take a second, so just be patient. We would now like to open this space to hear directly from those of you who are attending the forum. We want to engage in a really productive dialogue, so I am asking all members of our community, administration, and students to please remain respectful. If we cannot maintain a respectful and productive discourse, then we will be ending the session early. I see some of you are already raising your hands. Like I said, it's going to be a first come, first serve. So let me just move our senators over, and then we'll bring in the first person. And as I mentioned before, we would love it if you would come in and say your name and your program. If you haven't seen the raise hand function, the way to get there is to go to participants at the bottom of your screen. You will see your name in that list, mouse over it, and you can hit the raise hand button. I'm seeing a bunch coming in, which means it's working.